It was a beautiful day in Raleigh, California. As you could see, Edward was waiting to get into the yard because there was no room. Percy was waiting to get into the yard. Well, not into the yard, but he was waiting to move some cars onto an empty track. First, he had to wait for a train to remove 2 cabooses out of the yard. Then he could go. Now that the caboose train was out of the way, Percy could move these cars out and put them on the newly opened track. But he also had other duties to do. After a minute, Percy began shoving the cars onto the newly opened track. As you can see, Gordon was waiting to the right with a bunch of engines that needed to go for scrap. Or were not going for scrap, but were being sold to Mexico. And was waiting for Percy to hurry up. After a minute, Gordon rushed by with 3 locomotives being moved. He had to shove Edward a little bit too, because he couldn't fit. But they stopped, and Thomas, who was on the rear, began backing up. Gordon unhooked because he assumed Thomas could do it on his own. Thomas could, in fact, do it on his own, and moved all the engines out of the way. Had a little switch trouble, but was able to quickly move them out of the way, and waited for Gordon to come up and go by, because Gordon had other things to do. Edward began to come up, and he raced by, hauling some cars. He stopped. And then the switch was thrown, and he began to back up into the yard. His train was to terminate here, and he had some cars that needed to go. Where their destination was, he didn't know, but as he began to back them, he cooked up, and they went down that track. Stopped, pulled forward, and waited for his next assignment. Hey, Edward. Yes, Percy? Could you move those old engines? They said that they need to go to another... They want you to move them out of the yard real quick and wait for this local to leave. That can open up one of the tracks. Sure. So Edward came up, hooked up to the cars, the engines, uncoupled from Thomas quickly, and then just chugged out of the yard real quick to let that local leave, and so that they could get the cars out. The local actually, of course, obviously left. Some freight cars that needed to leave. Where the cars were headed, no one knows. Because practically no one knows in this universe where, 90% of these cars go. But the train cleared the yard, and was off to the next yard, presumably. And Edward backed up, before shoving those three locomotives into that track. He knew that the engines were being scrapped, so he didn't know where they were being scrapped, or that's what they were told was happening to the engines. Yeah, that they were getting a new wire. But he stopped to take a bit of a break. Then had to get the switch thrown and quickly hooked up to his cars because he needed to move them. Apparently. He didn't know what this railroad was doing, but he didn't mind. But then Percy had to move. He had 2 locomotives that were needing to leave the yard. So he slowly pulled out of the yard and left with the Union Pacific and a Southern Pacific behind him. They needed to be moved out of the yard as they were not needed at this yard at the moment. So they left the yard. As Edward waited for his next clearance, Henry raced by with a manifest. Not bound for this yard, but he raced by nonetheless. Thomas then quickly moved up the track and quickly dropped off 3 locomotives that had been shoved to the back of the track due to no room. He had to move to the next track, where he went down, collected 2 more engines, and moved them up. And then just was allowed to sit around and wait, while Edward still waited for clearance. But finally, Edward got the clearance to leave, but his story would only get crazier. As Edward got to the end of the siding, he had to stop and wait for a train to go by. This train would thunder by, revealing to be Gordon with a passenger train, or possibly even the express. It thundered by, shocking Edward. But then another train was flying through. It was a train of dead cabooses, all being sent off for scrap. Why the cabooses had been sitting wherever they had been for a while, no one knows. But that train cleared, and those cabooses were off for scrap. But now Edward was clear to proceed. Edward raced by across him at a high speed. He zoomed by, trying to hurry up for lost. He came up to the local windmill, or the local mill, at the stop when he saw a nemesis that he had never met before. Diesel 10. Someone he had never interacted with in the entirety of Thomas and the Magic Railroad because he wasn't even in it. Edward was not in Thomas and the Magic Railroad, fun fact. But still, he had never thought Diesel 10 would be here, and so he decided to start asking questions. Diesel 10, why are you here? Well, I was leased here. I've been leased here and I've been sitting here for the past 5 days. My drivers haven't come to collect me yet. Serves you right for trying to scrap us, and lady. Yeah, it's fun though. But what do you want? Well, I kind of got to deliver here, so could you, get your drivers to come here early? I need to deliver a car here. Or you could just move me. You know what, that's fair. So Edward uncoupled from his train and just went over and collected Diesel 10. And decided to move him, because he did this in a video. But then he continued pulling forward to deliver the car that was needed. So after shoving that car in, and even having it go on its own way, it stopped right under the windmill, luckily. As you can see, it stopped under the windmill. Edward backed up, hooked up to his cars, unhooked from Diesel 10, moved him back onto that track, came back, collected his cars, and continued off to wherever. Edward, finding the same line Percy used, came back to the yard and decided to shove in the last 3 cars that didn't need to go anywhere. Turns out no one needed wood, chocolate, or frickin' Easter eggs. No one knows why those were there, but he decided to shove them onto the track that had the 3 diesels. And just shoved it in there. Just shoved it on the track. Pulled forward, stopped, the switch was thrown, and he decided to go to the engine area and have a little rest. So, yeah. Decided to have a little rest before he was needed for his next duty. But as Edward was resting, a locomotive came up that was needing that log car. Dash. He goes, hey, Edward. Edward woke up and went, oh, Dash, hi, how did you get here? I'm here to collect the log car. Oh, okay, hold on. Give me a minute. Just rest. Just start resting. So Edward was complaining now because he had just literally gotten rested. He was ready to literally take a nap. He was ready to nap. He needed a nap for the day, but here came Dash needing that log car. He shoved the log car into the empty track, pulled forward, threw the switch, and back the truck. The 2 remaining cars. Before finally pulling forward, the switch was thrown, and he eventually backed in to where he needed to be. And told Dash, go get it. Dash came in, went over, collected the car, and subsequently left to take it back to probably Misty Island or something. And Edward would finally get a nap. As Edward was napping, someone ran up to him. Edward! It was his driver. Edward, a train has stalled further up the line. We've been requested to go help it. Edward said, alright. So the driver hopped on, and Edward raced away to go help the stalled train. Edward raced the line to see who it was that needed. After eventually getting up to where he needed to be, he saw exactly who it was. A train. He quickly hooked up to it and began to pull it back before he heard, oh, the indignity, and stopped. He went, Gordon? And Gordon responded, did you seriously stall again, Gordon? Gordon replied with, yes, I did. I stalled again. How many times do you keep stalling when hauling freight trains? This is like the 75th time that I've always had to help you while hauling a freight train. I know, Edward. I'm sorry. I just can't help it. Can't help it. This train's extremely tiny. How do you stall? I'm sorry. Oh my gosh. Gordon, you are incredible. Just incredible. Let's get you back to the yard. Good gosh. Edward was eventually able to bring Gordon back to the yard. Stopping Gordon right there, Gordon just sat. Just sat there. Deeply embarrassed. Edward pulled up alongside Gordon to watch the power change process. Gordon unhooked from his train, went into the yard with shame. He could say all the indignantly all he wanted. And another engine came out to help him. Edward sweared that this engine looked familiar. I decided to ask him, "Hey, I think I've seen you twice today." "Yeah, you might have. I've been working around the area a lot." "Do you happen to have a name?" "Actually, yeah, my name's Tom." "Okay, Tom. Nice to meet you." "Nice to meet you, too. I've got more important things to do, so I gotta go." And Tom rushed away. Edward wondered if why that name sounded so familiar, so he was going to ask one of his other buddies if they recognized that name. Edward backed into the yard and decided to ask Gordon if that name sounded familiar. "Hey, Gordon." "Hey, Edward. Come here to make fun of me or something?" No. I just came to ask, do you know of a CSX locomotive named Tom?" Gordon replied, "Oh, yes, he came by while you guys were away. He worked on the island while you were away." "Why do you ask?" "Oh, I just talked to him. He used the engine that took your train." "Oh. I've always wondered how he's been. It's been a couple years since I've seen him." "Yeah, I don't think because you said he came by when I was gone." "Yeah, he came by when you and I believe Thomas were off on vacation. He came by and helped out. So yeah, good to know that he's around here." "Yeah, just wanted to know because that name sounded familiar. I thought I heard you mention him once, so I said to come by and ask." "Yeah. Well, let's rest up now." "Alright, I don't know what I'm doing, and I know Thomas hooked up to those cars over there with those old engines. I think he's going to take those out in about an hour or so. But let's get some shut-eye and whatnot. I'm going to take a little nap. I'm going to do the exact same." And with that, Gordon and Edward took a nap. And that will conclude our story. Beautiful day in Raleigh, California. Edward was waiting to get into the yard, due to the fact that there was basically no room in the yard. After a minute, Percy was able to quickly run around the consist and began shoving it. Oh, come on.